It is not very often these days that I get to do a musician, which is very disappointing. So I'm very happy that Zoro the Drummer is here and spending some time with me. And because he is such a talent, I'm going to pick his brain endlessly about the things that he knows. First off, please tell me a bit about what it's like to be a musician in 2024 versus back when you first started.
It's a completely different era of music. When I first started, there were no even digital machines. Everything was analog, everything was real musicians. That whole side of the industry has completely changed. Now there's so many computers and drum machines and digitized stuff, so it's a completely different ball game. But I'd say the most important thing as I've evolved as a player, I've just become a better and better musician with each passing year. No matter how advanced machines get or how advanced AI gets or any of that stuff, in the end, nothing can feel like a human being. Nothing has the soul of a human being. And no digitizing or computer programming or drum machine programming or loops can ever replace the multi-layered nuances that are capable in a musician's hands and heart. Between the hands and heart, there's nothing that's ever going to replace that. But yeah, it's a completely different industry. If you're great at what you do and you stand out, you'll always be in demand because there's people want to be moved by passion, not precision. AI could be precise and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't have the passion of a human being. So, in the end, people want to. My job as a drummer, it was the same in the beginning as it is now. It's the same job I have as a writer, because I'm an author. It's the same job I have as a creative being. I only have one job in all of those forms. I'm a speaker, I'm a drummer, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, and my job is the same in all of them. And the job is to elicit emotion, to make people feel something deeply. And that is my job as a writer, as a drummer, is to make them feel something. As a writer, it's to make them feel love, hate, pain, whatever, but they got to feel something. They can't just be like, it can't just be like blah, it's bland. So I play drums the same way I write, the same way I speak, the same way I teach, with all of my heart, with passion, and at the end of the day, you're gonna feel something. And so my job has not changed as a drummer from the beginning to now. And the job is still the same. It's to be supportive of the music that you're playing. It is to support the song, the composition, the author. And if you do that well, then people love you because you're like the caboose of the train, or you're like the engine that makes it all go. And then as a writer, your job is to make people feel something deeply in the pages of the written word, enough to where they're intrigued to keep reading. People want to feel something. It's a boring world, but we want something that takes us out of that boredom and
Sure.
goes, ah, yes. So yeah, the job's always the same for all of those skills.
Thanks. Now, I want to ask you, because I know you went to Berkeley College of Music. Not everyone gets the opportunity to go to school or get an education relative to playing music. If I have a young man who's watching this today, or even a veteran who maybe wants to get back into music, how necessary is it for them to get that fundamental education, or is there a way to learn from scratch?
It's always, here's the way I look at it. Everybody who has a musical gift has a particular amount of talent that they were given. And that's something you can't self-manufacture. Like I didn't give myself the gift of rhythm. I was born with it and then one day recognized it. So none of us can really give ourselves talent per se. The only thing God gives talent. What we do is recognize it and then we develop talent that's already there. We develop potential that's already there. So I look at the gifts of God as gifts of potential, and they come in the form of a seed, and that seed is a seed of potential. And I can't pick what that seed is. So, in other words, if I've got a vocal gift, then I've got it, but I can't make myself be a great singer if I don't already have that. I can become a greater singer or a greater drummer or a greater musician if I develop those skills. So, no matter who you are or where you're from, if you do have that gift, then your responsibility is to cultivate it and turn it into more. And I almost look at it like a crop. It's like, let's say somebody hands me seeds of watermelon or corn. Like I didn't invent the seed. Somebody hands it to me, but I'm responsible for putting it in the ground. I'm responsible for the soil and watering it and fertilizing it and protecting it. And something magical will grow if I abide by these principles, by these laws, even though I didn't create the seed. But if I abide by the laws that are written in nature, and it's the same thing with talent. if you have a gift and you have a talent, then you abide by the laws, which is I must develop it. I must study the craft. There are traditional ways to study the craft, like in the form of a music college or school. There are non-traditional ways, people that just are self-taught. They don't even know how to read music, but they hear music. For instance, the great jazz guitarist George Benson, he doesn't read music. And the great big band drummer, one of the most legendary of all time, Buddy Rich, he never read a lick of music. But they had incredible natural ears. They could hear music and they studied the craft and they studied with masters. And so there's no way to avoid studying the instrument if you want to be great. It doesn't mean that you'll get to go to a Berklee College of Music or a North Texas State or a Juilliard and that can't stop you either. That's not going to stop you. If the most important thing is that you're studying privately. When you're talking about drums and instruments, the quickest way to learn is one-on-one, like with another master. One-on-one with somebody who's a master of their craft,
Hmm.
not only a master of their craft, but also a master teacher. Because some people are a master at the craft, but they don't know how to teach or they don't have the patience to teach. So a great teacher, personal one-on-one lessons can take you further than just about anything. And nowadays, with the internet and the YouTube and the drum videos and Drumeo and the master classes that they offer on just about everything from cooking to screenwriting, there is no reason in the world why somebody can't learn to be great. I'll give you an example. As a drummer, I'm more educated in a formal way, but then I also mostly am also a private way. I went to Berklee College of Music, but then I also took private lessons and really immersed myself by myself. As a writer, my memoir just came out called Maria's Scarf, which is my life story. As a writer, I'm more self-taught, meaning I bought over 300 books on the craft of writing memoir and studied how to write memoir over the last 15 years. And I've read hundreds of memoirs to see how people tell their story. I always knew I had an incredibly compelling story, but I had to learn how to master how to tell that story. In the music sense, I'm more traditionally educated. In the writing sense, because I'm at an age where I wasn't able to go to college and study to become a writer, I'm already a working person in the world. But I've always been very self-motivated and self-taught. Even with drumming, I would take lessons and then I would buy drum books and I would go to master classes and clinics and workshops and then as I got a chance to travel with some of the world's greatest musicians and drummers, always learning from them. So I'm a lifelong learner. But my memoir, Maria's Scarf, is out now, and it's only been out for a few weeks. There's 161 reviews on Amazon. Every one of them is 5 stars. I've been hearing from people all around the world how much this book has touched them, moved them, inspired them, challenged them, made them laugh, cry. Basically, what they're saying is you've written an excellent book. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying that in any kind of boastful way. I'm saying that inside of me was always the heart of a writer. I started a diary when I was 10 years old, and I kept writing into my early 20s. Then I've written a book called The Big Gig, and then I wrote a book called Soar. These are all life manual type books on how to make it, and I wrote 4 drum books. Those were all the prelude to what I just did, which is my memoir. So they were all training to write the magnum opus, the hardest thing I've ever done.
Sure.
But my point is, just from being self-taught, and now I had many great editors that taught me things along the way. So that would almost be like a drummer taking lessons from a great drummer. You're
Sure.
learning from these other great writers, and they would edit my work and say, you need to work on this more. You need to pull that out. And so all that stuff, but I'm living proof that both ways can work. The self-taught with that. In
Mhm.
other words, I wasn't going to be able to go to school and become a writer. That ship already sailed.
Sure.
But in the modern world, there was nothing stopping me from becoming a great writer because I had the desire. I had a natural ability to communicate story. I just didn't know how to write a memoir, which is super complicated.
Right.
But I learned it. And the outcome is that the book has been in the top 25 of Amazon's hot new releases under rock biographies. I'm in there with Elton John, the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen, and I'm not one of those guys. I'm a musician who's played
Right.
with those people. So I'm living proof that it can be done if you have the talent and then mostly the desire to cultivate it and to learn. And there's no way you can avoid the process of learning and growing and studying and be
Right.
great. It's impossible.
You bet. I know because I have read this through my research that you also give lessons, which I can't believe you have time to give lessons because you are either playing or doing everything that you do. Talk to me about Zoro the teacher in terms of what is it that you bestow upon your students, maybe that you necessarily either learn through them, because sometimes I'm told musicians that work with students actually learn about themselves through that process.
Yeah, I've always loved teaching. I have a teacher spirit. Some people are only players and performers and they don't have the teacher temperament at all. They don't enjoy it. They just do what they do well, but they don't know how to explain it. I'm both. I'm a player and I'm a teacher. I taught at Belmont University in Nashville for 9 years as an adjunct in the percussion department with some legendary percussion teachers. And I have always, almost always taught. I enjoy teaching because I like imparting things to people. That's probably the reason why I've written 4 drum books and why I wrote a book called The Big Gig, which is a 400-page book on how to make it as a musician. And I wrote a book called Soar on how to live out your dream. And so that's the teacher inside me that wants to help people grow. Of course, when you teach, you learn how to explain. There's things that I did naturally that I just heard instinctively, but didn't really know how to explain them to somebody until I started teaching. I love basically sharing all that I've learned about music with them and my passion for music and drumming with them. So I've collected like 15,000 CDs in my collection of music. So I know a huge body, a wide body of music. And it's my joy and passion to expose people to that music that maybe they've never heard and to see them do something they didn't think they could do. And I'm the kind of teacher who has taught all kinds of levels of students. There's some of my colleagues that are in my same league of drumming, but they only take students that are really super great already. They don't have the patience for somebody who's just starting. And
Sure.
I'm not that way. I've taken people who've never played ever. I'm 4 things. I'm a player, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, and I'm a speaker.
Mhm.
And I enjoy all 4 of them equally. And so I get bored if I'm just doing just one. They're all different expressions of who I am, and they're all equally important, and they all reach a different group of people. My book, my memoir is going around the world, touching hearts of people that I'll never meet, and they'll never see me play, but they're somewhere in some part of the world reading my book, and they're being touched by my life and by my words. So that's enjoyable for me. There's other people that won't read the book, and they'll be touched by my music or somebody by me speaking. So the goal of all these things is to impact people in a positive way and inspire people because music's inspirational, words, power of words we live by. Words shape our lives. They are the most powerful thing in the universe, really. The words that we speak, the words that we speak to ourselves, the
Mhm.
words we internalize and believe, and the words we speak to others. So the written word is important, the spoken word is important. They're all just expressions of my natural gifts, and they're all going to reach different people differently.
Right.
And so that's the goal is how many people can I reach with my lifespan of the experiences, the background that I have, the uniqueness that's me. How can I share that with the world in a way that I've made a difference?
Sure.
And and that's the goal with all of it. And it's also to be excellent at something, but not for the sake of I didn't work on Maria's Scarf all those years to write a book so people can go, oh, wow, he's an awesome writer. Like I didn't write it out of egotistical reasons. I wrote it out of heartfelt reasons of I have to share this incredible story with people to inspire them not to give up, not to quit. Jacques Cousteau, the great oceanographer, once said, if a man has lived a great life, he owes it to share it with the world. If you've had this chance to do these amazing things, which I have, you owe it to the world to share that adventure with them and what you've learned from it or the experiences to for them to peer into your life or into your world so that they might be able to get something from it. Because we're all inspired by the stories of other people
Yes.
without exception, all of us. And so this was my story. But the goal, my reason of wanting to be excellent at something is it's just my gratitude towards God for the gift. So, in other words, if I have the gift of writing, the gift of speaking and teaching and drumming, I didn't give myself those gifts. They were free, but
Sure.
I worked really hard to develop them. So God's gift is, hey, Zoro, I'm going to give you these 4 things to do life with and make a difference. Your gift back to me in the world is turning them into something excellent, but then also not becoming prideful and arrogant to where you thought you gave yourself the gift.
Hmm.
Because that's what happens to a lot of people. Once they get
Sure.
really great at something, then they forgot this whole magic bean was given to you. This whole magic seed was never yours to begin with. It was given to you. But people start to get arrogant because they go, I practice so hard. I'm awesome because I'm awesome. And the truth is, you're only awesome because you were created with that ability to be awesome in that arena. Because if we could all pick our gifts and talents, everyone would just pick whatever they want to be. But we don't get to
Right.
pick, you know,
Yes.
we don't get to pick that. You have it. You get to recognize it and discover it. But so I always say that the goal is to be excellent, but then to remain humble, realizing an analogy I would give you is kind of, let's say you're Bill Gates' son or daughter, and he's the richest guy in the world. And I used to travel with Paul Allen, who was Bill Gates' partner. He was the fourth richest guy in the world. So I traveled with the fourth richest man on planet Earth. So I've been around the wealthiest and I've been around the poorest. And I've been in the jungles of Ghana, Africa, amongst the poorest of the poor. And I've spoken at San Quentin prison amongst the most hardened criminals. So I've seen everything this world has to offer, the lowest and the highest. And but so let's say you're the son or daughter of someone like Bill Gates and he's a billionaire and he gives you $1 million to start a business. And then you're able to turn it into a $10 million business. And eventually you're able to turn it into a $100 million business. But at the end, if you go, I'm Bill Gates' son and I built my business from the ground up and I turned it, no, he gave you $1 million to start with. Anybody who had $1 million to start with could have done the same thing if they worked just as hard. So don't
Right.
get too cocky. Don't get arrogant and thinking you're all that because a lot of people didn't get the $1 million to start with. So that's how I look at gifts and talents. It's, hey, you were born with it. God, it was God given. So whenever you turn it into something big and amazing, always remain humble, realizing that you were not the giver of the gift. You
Right.
were the recipient of the gift. And that the joy in life is really being able to use that to inspire and touch others, not to lord it over people to see how awesome you are and how much they're not. And that's what pride does. It keeps people from thinking they can reach and do what you've done. Whereas humility makes you feel like, oh, wow, I've met some of the greatest drummers in the world. And when they were humble, they made me feel like I could do what they're doing. But the
Mhm.
prideful ones made me feel like, don't
Uh,
even think about getting near me because you're never
sure.
going to. So it's all in how you look at life, really.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I have to ask you when you're teaching these folks, because if you take a look at Zorro, it's pretty obvious. I've watched you and I see that you have this amazing sense of fashion and the signature hat. So do you say to them, hey, as a drummer, it's important. The look is important because it can distinguish you from other folks. Yes? Or is it just you just enjoy looking that way?
One, I just enjoy looking this way. Like my mother was from Mexico City. She was a very stylish woman and always carried herself with a bit of panache. She just had a sense of glamour. And then my older sister was a model. So most of the whole family always enjoyed fashion. And Latin people in general, it's a general statement, not everyone, obviously, but there's Latin people have some flair to them. To they like to dress up. And if you look at the cultures in South America, that and Mexico, that culture dresses up for more things than like just the common American does. Like fashion is something to that culture, right? So
Yeah.
part of it is culturally. And then the other part is just me as an artist. Like I'm an artist, I'm a creative person. Not every creative person, but a lot of creative people like to look different, and they're peacocks because well, the peacock flushes out those feathers, right? They know they've got these amazing colors, and there's something that attracts you to be on stage. It's a bit of a peacock in every entertainer, because if you weren't, then you wouldn't want to be on stage strutting your feathers. You'd rather be in a doctor's office or an accountant's office or
Right.
in a lawyer's office if you were not drawn to that something about standing out. Image has been important in my career and because it has allowed me to stand out. I have many things that like scarves, hats, jewelry, clothes. People know me as somebody who's likes fashion. So yeah, has that had me stand out? Absolutely. On the other hand, has anybody hired me to play drums just because I wear a scarf? No,
Yes.
no, because at first you got to deliver the goods. So
Yeah.
you have to be a good player. The rest of it just helps develop more of an image that's recognizable, a personality, something that stands out.
Sure.
So I always tell people just find you, whatever that is, because the most comfortable person in the world, the easiest person in the world to be around is the person who's comfortable in their own skin
Yes.
person. And if you're wearing stuff that doesn't really feel like you, like I always meet people that go, I dress different all the time. I have many different looks and many different fashion eras. One minute I'll have something I'm wearing from the 40s like Frank Sinatra. The next minute it's 70s Superfly. The next minute it's just Zorro, my own thing. It's always changing all the time, and I like that. But people will go, man, I can't believe you can pull that off. And I always tell them, you can pull off anything that you believe in, but if you don't believe in it when you're wearing it, you will not pull off anything. So
Sure.
I just believe that whatever I put on, I can pull it off because I'm believing it. It has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with, do I believe that I can wear this and own it and be alive and not feel like embarrassed? And so if you feel embarrassed and you're like all shy or whatever, then that's not you. The
Right.
key is to find whatever image is authentic to you. And not everybody in the music business and not every player is image conscious. I know people that just dress so plain Jane, but they're amazing players, and it's not stopped them from working
Right.
because people just go, he's an incredible bass player. But I have a little bit of Hollywood in me, and that's going to come out. That little flash and flare is going to come out, like I said, partially from my mother, my family upbringing, my cultural heritage, and my individuality. And I feel like everybody's got a song to sing in their life, and just find out what your song is. Find out who you are, and then just embrace that. But be unapologetic about it.
Amen.
And I want to express myself like that song, Express Yourself. I express myself also through the colorful way that I dress or my jewelry or
Sure.
my.
Now, I want to ask you this. When I first started looking into you, I saw that you were the number one R&B drummer in the world. So it got me to thinking to ask this question. Whenever anyone is ever referred to as the best, period, it begs to ask the question, now what? Did you think to yourself, okay, here I am, I'm right on the top, I'm on my A game, etc. So what happens now? And I know about the books, of course, but if we look ahead and say to ourselves, okay, what's the next big milestone for Zorro?
To me, first of all, I'm honored by that title. Again, it's just a title, it's people's opinions, right? So when you reach a certain level at anything, let's say you're the world's greatest, let's say you win a gold medal at the Olympics for running. You won that in your time, in your generation.
Right.
But there's going to be other people that win the next Olympics and the next Olympics. All you can hope to be is the best in your generation, in your era, because you can only live in your era and in your generation. There'll be others before you, and there'll be surely others after you. So I don't get so hung up on the title as much as there's a lot of great drummers, and there's a lot of, and when it comes to something, sports is different. You can say in sports, this guy made this many free throws in his career more than anyone, and it's calculate. You can calculate it, but you can't calculate like what's the best tasting ice cream in the world. That's just people's opinions.
Sure.
Who's the best actor in the world? I've met and hung with Denzel Washington, and I would consider him one, but so is Robert De Niro, and so is Anthony Hopkins,
Right.
and so is a whole host of others. So some people might not like them and might like the other. So when it comes to artistic things, I don't really believe there is such a thing as I just believe there's people that are great. And once you've entered into that arena, you're in there with a small amount of people, but it's larger than just you. There's many great R&B drummers. There's many great. So for me, I don't look at, oh, I've arrived at that. I'm always going, I can be so much better. I'm always practicing to grow as a musician. So I'm never like satisfied with myself as a player. And then I really wanted to grow as a writer. So it's not that the drumming, that I don't have the passion for the drumming anymore. You have to tell a story when you're playing, and you tell a story through structure. Like some drum fills will be 1 bar long, some will be 1 beat long. Sometimes it's a 2 bar phrase that you play. In writing, it's the same thing. You can't have every sentence be the same length, or it'll put people to sleep. You
Mhm.
have to have long sentences,
Sure.
medium. You have to have a Jesus wept, 2 words. That's a sentence. You have to have a mixture of things that break, and in drumming, it's the same way. Also, it's the same in that you have to learn this vast vocabulary. Then you got to learn to not overuse it. So when you're a young drummer, you learn all these licks and patterns, but then you generally overplay and you play too busy. And then you have to learn how to say less, how to say more with less. In
Mhm.
writing, it's the same thing. You learn all these words, but then you got to go, but I can't use them all because I'm going to sound like I'm trying to flex my muscle. show you what a great writer I am by turning a phrase every 3 seconds and using words that are more complicated than I need to for the story,
Right.
right? So you have to learn all the language so that you can then pare it down to just the right stuff. You have to learn phrases. You have to learn intros, middles, endings. When I do a drum solo, I have to think in a musical way. I have to have quiet moments. I have to have crescendos. I have to have a big bang ending. I've got to, and in writing, it's the same way. It's the same thing. It's just a completely different skill.
Sure.
And so I began to develop that passion for writing. And rather than, hey, let me try to be the best R&B drummer again, I'm always going to grow as a drummer. Those are just titles. But I'm going, I really want to write something, not so people say I'm a great writer, so people were moved by a great story. But you can't do that unless you're a great writer.
Yes.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And
Mhm.
so the goal is the story first. I have a great drummer friend of mine. His name is Steve Gadd, and he's 20 years older than me, and he's a legend of drumming. And it's he always said, he goes, they always go, oh, when you came up with that drum part or you did that or whatever. And he says, I was just trying to play what worked for the music. When you're writing a book, you have to write what works for the story. There are many
Right.
things I had to cut out because it didn't keep pushing the story forward. It was a cool story on its own, but it didn't push that forward. There's times when I played with people where I had really cool licks I could have done, but it didn't move the song forward. It was a distraction from the song,
Okay.
right? So writing and drumming are the same. You're looking to fit into the story. What parts move this story forward, the theme of the story forward, and what parts are distracting from it? And then it's the famous writer, his name will come to me in a minute, William Faulkner. He said, kill all your darlings, which means don't be so in love with the passage that you wrote. It could be amazing. You could have spent 3 weeks on this paragraph that's just knock it out of the ballpark. But if it does not serve the story or move the story forward in a better way, then be able to kill your darlings. Your darling, you're in love with this thing that you did, and be able to cut it and sever it and be able to move on because it did not. And they have to do that in movies where they cut scenes out. The scene by itself was a great scene. The acting was great. But when they've looked at the final thing, they realized it's not adding to the full motion of the picture. It's distracting. And so you go, gosh, man, that was some of my best acting. And that's what happens. And I had to do that in my book, Maria's Scarf. There were many things I wrote that were really great. And then the editors had to tell me, like, this is a great passage. You'll use it somewhere else, but it's not working for here. And I had to go, oh, man, I did so much research on that. I worked on that so hard. But in the end, I always did what they said because I knew that they were better editors than me and
Mhm.
they could see what I couldn't see.
Sure.
And in the end, I get the credit for being a better writer because they don't know that that was the advice of 12 other people that said to cut that. You know what I mean? It's just like when I'm in
Huh?
the studio and the bass player says, why don't you try this on the hi-hat instead of that? And his idea worked better than mine. In the end, when people hear the recording, go, Zorro had a great idea. Things are collaborative in a work setting.
Absolutely. Now, before we get to the books themselves, I want to ask you drumming. I
Yeah,
have lived with two drummers in my life. I'm living with my son now who is drumming constantly. He's got the song in his head, the tapping all over the place. Am I just stuck with this for life? Do you think the
pretty
tapping?
much. Pretty much. My wife will tell you after 29 years, like there's just that I'm always making noise. Tapping on, it's just what it is.
I figured as much. And I've looked through, and you've played for many years with all sorts of very different people. So, a musician once said to me that a musician will be able to know when they've done their greatest gig and why or how that happened. Have you had your greatest gig yet? And if so,
No, I think the greatest stuff is up ahead because every time I play something new, I go, wow, I'm better now than I was a year ago.
mhm,
Like literally, because what you get when you get older, and you can't do this as an athlete, but music's different. As an athlete, you're in your prime at a certain age. You're 80, you're not going to be hitting the basketball court like you did or running at the speed that you did. But music is different. Music, you could keep maturing. And part of maturing when you get older as a drummer and as a writer is your hands become you get more control, you get more nuanced. And in your writing, you do the same thing. You get better at sentences, you get better at the right word and the right because it takes you all of your life to learn the vocabulary and to go, this is the right word because this is a children's book. This is the right word for an adult book. Like you get better at the selections that you make and at pre-editing as you're even writing and as you're even
yes.
playing. You know what I mean? And that
Yes.
only comes with more time. The old 10,000 hours. I was just with Chris Rock the other day, the comedian, and we were having dinner together, and he was talking about he was talking about that whole thing with Will Smith when Will Smith slapped him. And he was talking about how he was Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers talks about it takes 10,000 hours to be masterful at something. He goes, man, I
Mm.
put in 40,000 hours. And I feel the same way myself. And he goes, when I put in 40,000 hours, I'm used to doing crowds where if you're in a stadium or an arena with 25,000 people, at every moment, 10% of the people could be getting up going to the bathroom in a
Sure.
crowd. So you can't let yourself get distracted because a bunch of people are walking in and out of the arena because that's going to happen with there's more people, right? And so his whole point was as you do this longer and longer, you get more skilled at not letting things because I was complimenting him on how he was able to keep going on the
Oh,
Oscar
right.
like,
Yeah.
and he didn't let it completely take him out of the game. And that's what you get when you've done it for 40,000 hours. And the longer you do that, the more of a veteran you become at your responses to things musically. And some of my favorite drummers that are still around like my buddy Steve Gadd, I'm going to go see him with James Taylor, and he's invited me to the concert in June in Nashville. And all the guys in James' band are in and around that age, but they're
Right.
all legendary musicians. But what they have now that they didn't have 40 years ago is just this complete mastery of dynamics and touch and tone that just keeps getting better
Sure.
because of the more years. So I don't look at any point of having arrived at anything. I just go, great. The book got my Maria Scarf got great review in Publishers Weekly. All the reviews on Goodreads and Amazon are like 5 stars. Those are the people are all that really matters. But I know that there's even better in me ahead. Like I was like, great. This is the best work I could do right now with the knowledge that I acquired up to this point. But in 2 years from now, I'll be better and better. And that's how a lot of actors I know feel. They'll look at their work and they go, that was as good as I was then. And it was good enough to get an Oscar, but I'm
Yes.
better now
Yes.
if you keep working the craft. And so there's something you can't replace with time. There's a wisdom that comes from living longer that you can't get from living shorter. You might
Yes.
have actual raw talent and the fire and the ferocity. Like when I was a younger writer, one of the editors said to me, he goes, you write with a lot of fire. He goes, but you need to learn more of the skill of what to cut out and not to over. I was overwriting, just like I was
Okay.
overplaying when I was a young drummer. You want to show everybody, you just overwrite something. The whole point is to simplify.
Sure.
And sometimes somebody will write a really long sentence and you go, you could have said that like half that amount. It's you're just going on and you're just it's too verbose. You're just and you can do that in drumming and you can do that in writing and you can do
Sure.
that in speaking. There's a book I read called The Elements of Style. It's the standard book for writers. It's been for years. But one of the things that I learned from it that stuck out was eliminate, omit useless words. There's
Ah,
so many things you can put
yes.
in a bunch of words to sound wordy, to sound more important, like what we're saying, when you
Yes.
can put the three of them and the same thing come across. And that took me a minute to learn in writing, just like it took me a minute to learn in drumming.
Okay.
Simplify. And it's not so simple to do it. But when you read something or you listen to a great song, you go, why do I like this song? Why do I keep singing this hook over and over? Because it's a simple melody that just works. It's not super complicated. And,
Okay.
we will rock you. I mean, the boom, the whole world can do that.
Yes.
Boom, boom. It became an anthem. Is the melody hard? No, it's simple. Sometimes the simplest thing is what catches the most amount of people.
Yeah.
And writing has to be the same. I've been told from people who've read my memoir that as soon as they start it, they cannot put it down, that it immediately caught them and they couldn't stop until they were done. Like,
Huh.
but that was years of learning how to write so that it flies, so that
Right.
it moves off the page, because it could have been all clunky like it was in the beginning when I
Sure.
didn't understand how to pare things down and how to make things move quick. Simple doesn't mean easy, and simple doesn't mean not profound. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
It's just a way of communicating something that goes straight to the heart and it moves quickly and you're not getting lost in the weeds. You know how you read something and you'll go yada 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 yada, get to the and when you're watching a
I
movie, like
do.
there's a scene from it's an older movie with Robert De Niro. It's called Once Upon a Time in America. And
Yes.
there's a scene where the phone is ringing, or maybe it's The Godfather, one of those movies, but the telephone is ringing and it just goes on and it starts annoying you because he's not answering the phone. And you'll notice that in movies in the earlier days, scenes were like a lot longer. They just took forever to get to. Now things are cut and move much quicker.
Oh
If you
yeah.
watch the old James Bond movie with Sean Connery, the whole thing is paced so slow it's unreal, as opposed to watching a new one. So sometimes it's about telling the same story, but telling it in a quicker fashion that you don't lose people.
Hmm.
But that's the best filmmaking was then. That was the style then.
Correct.
Scenes could be so long, and so you learn to go, how could I say more with less? How could I move it so that people they don't get lost and go, is this story going anywhere? Well, this has nothing to do with where, and bad writing does that. Bad screenwriting does that in movies, and you've seen full produced movies, and you go, my God, the dialogue was terrible. You know,
Yes.
maybe they were under the crunch and they didn't have the time. The good thing about taking 15 years to write my memoir was that if I had gotten a book deal 15 years ago and they gave me a year to write it, it would never be the quality of the book that it is. But
Okay.
because I had 15 years where I got turned down over 100 times by publishers, I just had more and more time to keep developing the craft. So
Hmm.
by the time I got a book deal, it was already a beautiful book because of the 15 years of learning.
Oh, you betcha. Absolutely. Now, I want to ask you this because I'm an aging writer myself, and at 54, I know that my tools are my hands. And obviously, I'm getting older, which means that I have to preserve the tools that I have. So, likewise, for yourself as an author and a drummer, how do you preserve the gifts that you have? Because it's a physical gift to some degree. So, how do you
Yeah.
keep that tuned up?
You're talking about like their physical hands, period.
Yeah, you
As
betcha.
yeah, I eat fairly healthy. I would say I eat healthy about 80% of the time. So
Okay.
20% of the time I could have some fun. So I take care of myself. I work out. I've never been a partier, so I've never abused my body ever. Like I've never done drugs. I've never been drunk. I've never been high. I've never been any of those things. I'm 61. I'm about to turn 62. And not for any moral reasons or any spiritual reasons, but all completely practical reasons. Like I grew up dirt poor, single immigrant mother, raised 7 children alone. At one point, we lived in a car. That's my story. Maria's scarf is this overcoming story of this kid against all odds who lived out this dream.
Sure.
And one of the benefits in growing up that way is that everything else that I did in my life is a bonus. Everything else is a gift. So I looked at it like, why would I spend this $500 I have for my per diem? Why would I spend it on drinking when I could buy drumming books or I could take 3 lessons from 3 great guys in New York when I'm in town? Or I was always trying to build something, not destroy something.
Sure.
It was so hard to build something, and I couldn't. I never it never made any practical sense to me. All the people that I on the road that would waste all their money drinking or partying, I'm going like, then they're not going to have that money, and they won't be able to buy the records that I'm buying and the things that I'm learning or the clothes that I want to buy. Like to me, it was all just practical reasons why I stayed away from all that. And because I didn't have anything, I didn't want to part with what little I had and
Sure.
see it squandered away or go up my nose or disappear. So that was all that. And it allowed me to just maintain just a positive focus on what am I doing with the assets that I have. The assets are only a couple of things. The assets are your time, and the assets are your money and your resources,
Yes.
right? We only have so much time while we're alive, and we only have so many assets to do something with. So I wasn't going to waste my assets on anything. I spent all my money on records and books and houses and things that I felt were an investment into my future. And then I also take a lot of supplements, like I take turmeric, which is a very healthy thing. And so I have no inflammation in my hands or in my joints. And so my hands feel just as good now as they did when I was 18. I don't feel any like bodily things where I'm going. And I work out a lot. I do the best I can to
Right.
take care of my body. I too, and everyone listening is an aging whatever. Whatever you are, you're aging. Whether you're 18 or whether you're 12 or whether you're 90. We're all aging. It's funny, we only use that term when you get older, but are you kidding? From an infant to the time you die, you're aging. We're aging. Time is moving and this body's getting older. But I do believe we are the stewards over our own body. And so here's where I look at the playing field as even for all people in life, the rich and poor. Nobody, rich or poor, gets more than 24 hours a day. Nobody can buy more time. Paul Allen couldn't buy more time. Steve Jobs couldn't buy more. Nobody gets more than 24 hours a day to figure out how you're going to manage that time and what you're going to accomplish or not accomplish in that 24 hours. And nobody, without exception, rich or poor, gets more than one body to do life in. So you only get one body and you got a 24-hour increment every day to do something or not do something. And no matter whether you're rich or poor, because believe me, if you could and you were rich, you would buy more time and you would buy a newer body. You would say, hey,
Yes.
I'm 90 now, I'm gonna buy this young person's body. You would if you could, but you can't. So this is where you go, hey, I have a certain finite amount of time. And so here's my real goal, Cindy. My real goal is like with the finite amount of time I've been given, which nobody knows how long that is, right? Nobody knows how long they have on this planet, and no one could say for sure I got 90 years or 20 days or nobody knows. So but it is a finite amount of time. It means it does have an expiration date. It will end. So my goal is like, how can I impact and affect as many people as possible in a positive way with my lifespan with the few gifts that I've been given? That's the goal, is touch as many lives as I can. And that's not just with my four unique talents, unique meaning, drumming, speaking, teaching, writing. They're not, other people have them too, but in my own unique way of expressing them. But the greatest way you impact people is their personal encounter with you. So like I could have all this success and be a total jackass and be arrogant. When people meet me, it's not a positive experience. It's not a joyful experience. It's not an uplifting experience because I've met lots of people like that. And they're arrogant, they can't be bothered, and they're rude, and they don't make you feel they make you feel insignificant. You're not making it. You're making a difference, but it's a negative one.
Right.
You're not using what you've been given to make a positive difference. So my goal is like, hey, when people encounter me, whether it's through an interview, whether it's at the airport, they recognize me, whether it's at a party. I was just at Lenny Kravitz's 60th birthday party in Paris, and everybody was there from Selma Hayek to Chris Rock to Marissa Tomei, Lawrence Fishburne, tons of people. And like I had a chance to be a blessing to all the people that I met because I was kind to them and I was joyful and I was fun and I was interested in them and we had great conversation. And I'm just naming people that the rest of the world knows, but I'm that way at the airport when I meet total strangers. So I'm not a different person in that setting that I am in
Yeah.
another setting. I'm trying to be the light wherever I go in a dark world. I'm trying to be a force for positivity, for encouragement, for hope through my story, through inspiring them and through teaching them. And even if I got a chance to encourage Denzel Washington's son, and he's the son of one of the greatest actors of all time,
Mm-hmm.
that must be a burden because he's wanting to do acting too. And I could see I'm trying to do my best. And I'm like, you're going to do it. I totally changed his whole thinking. And I spent 5 minutes mentoring him on how to speak and how to think of yourself and don't worry about your father's shadow. In other words, I had a chance to impact that kid. But he's Denzel's son. But at the same time, I've impacted thousands of people like that nobody knows who their parents are.
Right.
Not, in other words, I treat all people the same. They're all important. They all want to be loved. They all want to be encouraged. They all need a word of hope. They all need to be inspired. They all need to be motivated, including the people that are big stars.
Absolutely.
And so that's the goal of my life is to having lived a life and made a difference. There's a couple of quotes, several. I collect quotes and I've memorized many over my life, but Jackie Robinson had a quote. He said, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on others." And that's totally true. A life is not important except in the impact it has on others. So what if you're Jackie Robinson, but you're still a jackass and you work cool? And a life is not important except in the impact it has on others. Another one that I like, it says this, it says, the purpose of life is to plant trees under whose shade you never expect to sit.
Hmm.
The purpose of life is to plant trees under whose shade you never expect to sit. Meaning, all the young people that I've encountered in my life that I'm trying to inspire through my drumming, speaking, teaching, and writing, I'm planting seeds for the future generation in them, and I may never see those trees grow and come to fruition.
Sure.
But the goal of the purpose of life is to plant trees under whose shade you never expect to sit. I may never be the recipient of the greatness that comes out of them. The next generation will be. But my purpose was to sow into those people so that they turn into the tree they're supposed to, so other people can be shaded under their mighty oak tree because
Yeah.
you poured into them. So it's really about the purpose of life is to sow into other people.
Yeah.
Some of them you'll see grow and some of them you won't. I meet people all the time that an example, when I was with Lawrence Fishburne and Chris Rock, and Chris Rock was telling a story of how when he was starting off in Hollywood 30 some years ago, he got kicked out of a hotel because he didn't have any more money to pay it. It was it was straight in the heart of Hollywood. And he was telling the story to all of us, and Lawrence was sitting next to him, and he goes, and Lawrence, and you drove by in your Mercedes and you picked me up. You saw me that I was struggling on the street with a suitcase with three wheels. And then you took me to so and so's house, some other entertainer. This was at the beginning of Chris's career. He wasn't like well known. He was just a young up and coming comic. Lawrence doesn't even remember it. At the whole table, he was like, I don't even remember that. What? This is news to me. He goes, no, you did that. And then another guy told a story about how Lawrence had done that for him. So I've done that so many times in my life where I've helped people, and then I'll be at the airport, some kid or at some clinic or some concert, and somebody will go, man, I remember I was struggling in my marriage like 20 years ago, and I came over to your house for a couple of days, and you and your wife talked to us, and we made it through that. And I don't even remember the whole thing. I don't even remember it's just like the Lawrence Fishburne thing. He
Yeah.
didn't even remember doing it. Like I didn't even remember doing it, but I take it must be true because this guy's pouring his heart out to me, telling me. But so when you live that way, you live that way every day.
Hmm.
You're not calculating it. And I can't remember all the encounters I've had with people, but I know that at least 95 or 98% of them have been positive. There's been times when maybe people caught me on an off moment, or they'll say, it's funny how people are. You could do like 100,000 good things. And the
Hmm.
minute you do something that's not good is the one they point out in you and the one they focus on instead of all the things you've done that are good. But so I haven't been perfect, but let's say 95% of the time I've been very intentional about having people have positive encounters with me. And so I don't keep track of that. But there are people out there that remember these stories just like I remember stories of people who were positive to me and encountered me when I was young, and they don't even remember it. It was just another conversation, but it was life changing for me
Right.
because it was a positive one by somebody who I admired or looked up to or idolized. And that's where you have to understand the power that you carry whenever you have a level of success or a platform, but also you carry that same power just as a human being with no success.
Sure.
Everybody can be kind. There's another great quote by Philo of Alexandria. It says, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great
Yep.
battle,"
I know that one.
which is true.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone you meet, without them saying it, everyone is fighting a great battle of some kind inside. So be kind. That's the most basic human rule of all, but one that people have lost sight of. Fame is to be kind or to
Right.
impact. You just have to be
Absolutely.
nice going about your life.
You betcha. Now, when you wrote The Big Gig, that's obviously a very different type of writing versus doing Marie Scarf, obviously, because that's a memoir. If I were to ask you, which is more comfortable for you? Have you shifted it into the whole more personalization story and that's comfortable for you? Or are you still just better off on the other side of the fence as a writer?
Writing it's like medicine. I tell people writing a motivational book is like being a pediatrician, a certain level of skill to be a pediatrician.
Yeah,
Writing a memoir is like being a neurosurgeon. That's a higher level of skill. Just because you're a pediatrician doesn't mean you can operate on the brain and do neurosurgery and separate Siamese twins. That requires a whole nother level of intense study for many more years and much more years of practice, right?
sure.
So most people can write a motivational book because in a motivational book, I can just tell you something. In a memoir, you have to show. So, for instance, in a motivational book, I could say, my mother was a very courageous woman. I just told you that. But that's not going to emotionally move you. In a memoir, I have to create a whole scene in which that my mother was a courageous woman based on the dialogue, the scene, the setting, all the character arc. You have to, it's so much harder to create a scene than for me to just tell you, hey, here's 7 things you should do to become great.
Yep.
in those seven things to be great, I don't have to create characters. I don't have to create themes. I don't have to create character arcs. I don't have to create dialogue. I don't have to create a setting. In a memoir, it's a story. It has to be immersive. I immediately have to set you into a setting where you feel like you're there. And that comes based on how you describe a shaft of sunlight shone through the broken window pane. Like you have to be able to visualize, you have to plant the person there. That takes a lot of thought and a lot of work to learn how to do that. Now
Hmm.
that I know how to write memoir because I've studied it for 15 years. Whatever next book I do, in other words, I'll write what that book needs to be. If it's a motivational book, then you don't write it like a memoir. But if it's a book where you're telling a story or an article where you're telling a story and it's a 3,500 word article and you want to tell a story, I will tell it in an immersive way, like what I've learned to do in memoir, because that captivates people. That puts them into your shoes. And if I was going to write about this party that I was just at in Paris, and I wanted to take you there with me, I'd have to describe what it was like to come up to the Hotel Crillon, and I'd have to describe Paris in that part of the city. Then I'd have to describe the chandeliers and the Italian marble that was in the entryway, and all these things, so you can get a sense that
Right.
hey, and instead of me just saying, "Hey, I was at this party at this fabulous place," that
Yep.
doesn't take you there.
Sure.
So writing memoir, you have to take people there. And the one thing where I know I accomplished it is that everyone who's read it immediately after the first chapter, they go, you took me, like I felt like I was with you at every step of the book. Like as soon as I started reading, I could picture it like a cinematically like a movie. And that is what good memoir is. You are taking the person with you there and they're feeling like they're a fly on the wall. And that's done through all those mediums, dialogue, character arc, scene, setting, and just the right amount of each. It's very tricky, you know?
Oh, yeah. And I also imagine because as a drummer, most of the time when I talk to a musician, they have a process not only for warming up and for playing, but as a writer, do you have a process? Some of us lock ourselves in a room for days on end. Some of us stop writing for weeks because we get blocked. Do you have a so-called process?
I don't really have a particular one. I just know that I wrote everywhere. In fact, some of the people that I worked with reminded me, and they would say, even Frankie Valli, he goes, I used to see you writing all the time at the rehearsals. Because at the rehearsals, they would do vocals when I was with Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons.
Okay.
Maybe be a 4 hour rehearsal, but three of it was like vocals. So I'm just sitting there on my drum throne, like bored out of my mind until they need me to play the drums for an hour. I quickly got onto that. I was like, no, I'm going to have my laptop and I'm going to be working on my book until they say, now we need you to play.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm gonna be noodling and I'm going to get on their nerves because I'm sitting behind the drum. Like, I need to be hitting something. And everyone who knows me, who has worked with me, has seen me write all of my books on in planes, trains, automobiles, parties, backstage. Like I just learned to write everywhere.
Right.
Sometimes in bed at 3 in the morning,
Sure.
but because I don't live a kind of a 9 to 5 lifestyle where I had an exact routine every day and every year of my life could look different. I just learned to write wherever I was at. Sometimes it's 10 minutes while I was waiting for my kids in the car, and I would just pull out the laptop, put it on top of me while I'm waiting in the car line. Sometimes I am inspired at 6 in the morning or 8 in the morning, and I write until people wake up and start asking me for stuff. So I just try to steal the minutes wherever I could get them. And but I was diligent in doing that, in stealing the minutes. And I'm excited to get back to writing because I have more stories I want to tell, but I'm in such a deep mode of promoting the book, our mode, because that's what you have to do. It's part of
Yes.
to make something. But the other thing is, we're working on turning my whole story into a movie and like a series. And
Nice.
when you read the book yourself, you'll get what I'm saying.
I was just going to say, I've yet to read it, and I want you to. I'm going to give you three sentences only. Please describe Maria Scarf in three sentences to your audience.
First, let me give it to you in just 4 words,
Okay.
and I'll think about the sentence. 4 words, the four things that you'll get out of this book. It is heartwarming, heartbreaking, hilarious, and hopeful.
Oh,
So Maria Scarf is the story of, in a few sentences, it is the story of the incomparable love of a mother, the unbreakable bond of a family, a starry-eyed kid who refused to give up his dreams, and the power of friendship.
very nice. Now, when most people watch a podcast that's promoting a book, one of the things that runs through their head is, why Zoro's book? Why should I spend the money? Why should I get his book? How do you differentiate your memoir from someone else's?
Mine will, this is from the people who have read it. This is not my opinion. This is just, if you go read all the reviews on Amazon and Goodreads or whatever, and I've had many beta readers during the years read it
Mhm.
along. Everyone, I had a lady who read it the other day in her 60s, and she said this. She said, "Your book makes me want to dream again, makes me want to go after the unattainable, the unimaginable." Because in my life story, I'm very much like the real Forrest Gump. All these impossible things that shouldn't have happened to Forrest happened. All these things that I got to do shouldn't have happened, but they did with the power of love, faith, hard work, perseverance. And so my book is for everyone. It is not for musicians. It's not even for drummers. It's for dreamers. It's for anybody who has a vision or a dream, anybody who wants to be inspired, anybody who wants to go, I'm not quitting now. And so that's everybody. I never wrote it. It's not even really, yes, I talk about some of the great musical things that happened towards the end of the book, but it's really about this kid's journey from the impossible situations of father abandoning him. So we're dealing with abandonment, bullying, abject poverty, rejection, instability, racism, all these things facing this kid, and somehow he makes it through all that and makes it to the top of the world. And if that doesn't inspire the hell out of you, nothing. So it is an epic overcoming story. It is an underdog story. We're all underdogs in some way, which is why we love those stories and movies. So this is like the American dream. This is like Rudy, Rocky, Forrest Gump meets The Blind Side. That kind of a story. It has that kind of a spirit when
Sure.
you watch those movies and you just go, oh man, it makes you not want to give up. So it's really for everyone. It honors the office of motherhood. It honors family. It honors friends, and it shows you how to make a dream come true.
Nice. Now, are you still doing, I know that you were on tour for the book, so are you still doing appearances and signings
Yes,
and things? You are.
yes.
Okay.
So I'll
Okay.
be doing that for a while.
Do you know where you're headed next? So if people watch this and they say, I want to meet this guy, I want to talk to him about the book, etc. Do you have any idea where you are next or where you're
Yeah,
headed?
I'm doing a few things. I'm doing some stuff in Nashville. I'm doing stuff in Oregon, Grants Pass and Ashland, Oregon. I'm doing stuff in Palo Alto. Then I'm doing stuff in San Diego. I'm at a big librarian conference in San Diego, where like 20,000 librarians come there.
Wow.
It's called the ALA, American Library Association Conference, and I'll be signing and giving away a couple hundred books. So I'm all over the place. Just follow
Okay.
me on Instagram, which is just Zoro the Drummer, Zoro the Drummer. So that's Zoro with one R. It's all one word. Zoro the Drummer on Instagram, Zoro the Drummer on Facebook. I'm always posting where I'm going to be next on those
Yes.
things. But yeah, Maria Scarf, the full title is Maria Scarf, a memoir of a mother's love, a son's perseverance, and the power of dreaming big, you
Yes.
know. So anyway, but there's something in there. And I really wrote the book because I thought about what's the best thing I can give to this world as a legacy? Because at some point I won't be playing, and at some point I won't be here.
Right.
I won't be performing live anymore. I won't be here in this world, but my book and my words could live on forever from generation to generation. And I read books that are 2,000 years old, 1,000 years old, 500, 100 years, and I'm still affected by those words of people long, long ago because the human struggle and the human challenges are the same every
Yes.
generation from the beginning of time. And the human inspiration is found in the same places. It's through the stories of people, right? That's where we find our hope. They always say mankind lives off of food, clothing, shelter, right?
Yep.
But it's not true. The last thing that we essentially live off of is story. Story is how we make sense of humanity. It's how we make sense of life. It's how we cope with things. It's how we deal with things. Story is just as important as the others. And it goes back to cave drawings and dwellings and parchment papers from the Bible. We live off of story and we cannot survive. And we work at a 9 to 5 job. What do we do at lunch? We tell stories. We tell stories of
Yeah.
the boss, good ones, bad ones. We tell stories of what happened at the last weekend. We survive through story. There's no take the human being out of story and there's no human being. So we are,
Yes.
so I figured the best thing I have to offer this world is this amazing story that will offer people hope and inspiration in a world that isn't so inspiring sometimes or so hopeful. But we have to find
Absolutely.
that light wherever we can grab it. So that's why I wrote it, and I wrote it to honor the love of my mother, to honor mothers around the world and families, because it is a family story of how my brothers and sisters, how we helped each other survive with no fathers and no money, and just nothing but love and vision. And that's a message for all people.
It is. And just so you folks know, it's on hard copy, but it's also an audiobook. I know that. So you've got both versions there. It's literally all over the place. You can't miss it. His
Yep.
actual main website is zorothedrummer.com. And then it spirals from there where you can find you like in every single place on the planet because he's like everywhere on social media, everywhere on the internet. You cannot see him. I have a very perfect closing question for you. That's not for me. It's for my 19-year-old son who's a drummer. I
Okay.
told him that I was interviewing a drummer. I didn't tell him who. And then he Googled you. And I said, what would you ask him if you were me? And here was his question. What
Mhm.
is the difference between a great drummer and the greatest drummer?
That's a good question. A great drummer and the greatest drummer. There's a lot of people that are great at things, but let's the greatest drummer is one who's humble enough to realize when he's great, he's not as great as he thinks he is. In other words, he or she is humble enough to go, see, what happens when you get really good at something is then you don't grow anymore because you think you're pretty good already.
Yes,
So to be great, you have to continuously hone in on humility and realize that you could grow so much more.
yes,
You can't grow if you don't remain humble, because then you think you so there's a lot of people that are actually good, but they think they're great. And they
yeah,
can't get great because they're not humble enough to let somebody speak into their life to let them know what it is that so in other words, it's easy to go from not playing at all to being really good than it is to go from being really good to the greatest, because the it's harder to discern what those things are, what those qualities are, because they're very minute, they're
yeah,
very finesse, they're very invisible. You know what I mean? Whereas to go from not playing to being great, it's obvious. You got to practice, you got to learn these beats, you got to learn all this stuff. But then when you've got all those basics down, it's more fine-tuned things. It's more things that fly under the radar unless you're a great musician, you can hear and discern, oh, that turnaround he did, the way it's the way you touch the instrument, it's the way you hit the instrument. It's all these personal things. It's all this nuanced stuff that the average ears can't discern, but they feel it.
huh,
It's if you ran the 4 minute mile, right? Remember when they thought it couldn't be broken?
yep,
Finally, somebody broke the 4 minute mile. How do you shave off like 2 seconds of your race? You know what I mean? Like it's going to
yeah,
require the minute little adjustments to just get 2 more seconds. It's so little and minor in detail that most people can't figure out what it is. What is it? Do you shave the hair off your back so you don't feel the wind blowing on your hair? Like it's such minor little increments to make that to get those little 2 seconds.
sure,
You know what I mean? And
yeah,
it's really tweaking to the nth degree, but it's so much harder to just now shave off a couple seconds.
yeah,
It was easy to go from 5 to 4. Not easy, but it was more, the road is more paved and more obvious on those bigger increments of change. The road gets dark and cloudy when like you're talking about a second.
Hmm.
And that's what it is, the difference between great and the greatest.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so one more time, zorothedrummer.com. The new book
Yep.
is Maria's Scarf, of course. You're going to his website to find everything about him. And I've been listening to you talk about legacy, and all I kept thinking to myself is, you've built quite a lovely legacy to begin with. And I can guarantee that I'm certain, far more things to come. I'm just very grateful that I was able to be in this little world that you have for this little amount of time to share with you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Cindy. Your questions were very poignant and very potent and very great. You're a great interviewer. You asked amazing questions,
Oh,
and you're
thank
also an
you.
amazing listener. You're a great combination of both,
Oh
because
my
some people
gosh.
aren't
Thank you.
both. People are one or the other. But you were
Gosh.
amazing. So it was a really good, really great interview because
Thank
of
you.
your acumen for this type of stuff. And so thank
No,
you.